British exceptionalism. There's always sayings in Britain that we're a bit different, we're a bit special. There's something special about being British. But what is it? It is different. I mean, it's not a nation. Britain is not a country, it's a union of nations, of two crowns, after we in Wales here had been swallowed. And on this channel, ben.llywelyn, croeso, welcome to the channel. I've been leading you through a Welsh History Series, but until this point, there's not been a united kingdom. We've gone all the way through, from the Celtic or British tribes, to us being a province of Rome, to a smattering of different kingdoms early on, to 4 chief kingdoms, and then mainly 2 rival dynasties within a kingdom competing to be the Kingdom of Wales, and then the Norman onslaught, and the rough frontier that broke between us after we pushed them back a little bit, and the chivalrous principalities that arose, and then slowly the principality of Gwyn A forming the Principality of Wales for every purpose, and then that on the verge of a feudal state, the invasion of Edward I, bringing our country down into the royal principality. And then the Wars of the Roses and the Tudors themselves being Welsh but abolishing out our laws and customs and even our mere existence, absorbed into England. And then slowly vanishing on a map. And that's where we are in this period. But we're within England at the end of the 17th century. This United Kingdom does not exist. So how do we go from being part of this English blob into this spanning maritime British Empire? I can't really go forward in this book, When Was Wales by Gwyn A. Williams, without touching on that at least, because it's significant. And there are 2 dates, 1688 and 1707, which are crucial. The first was a military coup d'etat, and the second was an aristocratic bribery / coup d'etat. And let's jump into those now. England and the Netherlands were not friends in the late 17th century. They had fought 4 wars, and through this, England had essentially embargoed Scotland, blocking off its most lucrative trading partner, causing horrific economic woes upon Scotland, largely because of this, but I'll get to Scotland in a moment. There were other things at play. In England, the king was James II, and by this time the crowns of England and Scotland had been unified, however. But they were different countries, separate legally, and Scotland had a parliament. But this king was Catholic. And things were fine until he produced an heir, which he said that he intended to raise Catholic. And those around him began to conspire with the Netherlands, their own enemies essentially, to remove this because of this popophobia. And they feared that he was becoming too Romanized, and they didn't want their privileges to be infringed upon. And a collection of 7 men, the Immortal Seven. Immortal Seven, it's a funny name for a group of people who invited in a foreign power who they had fought wars against their own king. These were conspirators. 6 nobles and a bishop. I mean, that sounds like some kind of medieval martial arts movie. But what happened is the king, James II, had a son, James Francis Edward Stuart, and he had had him baptized as a Catholic. Ooh, so these Protestant aristocratic families, they felt that their privileges could be threatened, that other people could come up through the ranks and compete for their privilege. They didn't like that very much, so they sent a letter to William, the stadtholder. Not a king exactly, but he was the nephew of the current king. But that's kind of a title for the leader of the Netherlands, who was already at this time considering an invasion of England. And they said, well, if you come over, we and our allies, we have connections in the military and nobility, we will rise up with you. What had really happened, let's be honest? They didn't want fair competition for their privileged aristocratic place. And they wanted William to come over and solve it for them. And so these elites conspired against their own king and infiltrated the military class to turn them against James II. And so when William of Orange from the Netherlands crossed over, landing way down in the southwest, he did not find much opposition to his rule when he came up toward London. William of Orange is a very peculiar figure because he doesn't appear to truly court any queen early on. And this letter that these immortal 7 conspirators had sent to him basically offered him a queen. That kind of would have sorted out his problems. And he gathers up an army of 20,000 and he crosses over, landing at Torbay in the southwest of England. Now this position to land is quite interesting because it's a moderate area climate-wise to land, sheltered, but also it would give him time to connect with rebels in England to turn over to his side. And that's exactly what happened. This was often called the Bloodless Revolution. There were a few small skirmishes, but as he approached with his army, the high-ranking nobles connected to the military just flipped over to his side most often. And this glorious revolution, or coup d'etat essentially, was quite easy. There wasn't much conflict. The military melted away before him, in some cases joining with him, because he essentially promised that he would crush Catholics and elevate this upper class of elites in exchange for power. He would give them more power and remove some of the king's power, which he would be king. It was a mutually beneficial coup d'etat. This group of people who gained power, these were the landed old Norman aristocracy who felt they had the right to rule. The Liberal MP John Bright had something very worthwhile to say later in a speech which he gave about the Crimean War and the corrupt class, mainly the Tory government at the time, who were descended really from those who gained power in this revolution. And he basically said this revolution was the grab by a group of elites to hold power. And this is what he said in that speech about the glorious revolution, this coup d'etat. You know, of course, that about 170 years ago, there happened in this country what we have always been accustomed to call a glorious revolution. A revolution which had this effect, that it put a bit into the mouth of the monarch, so that he was not able of his own free will to do, and he dared no longer attempt to do, the things which his predecessors had done without fear. But if at the revolution the monarchy of England was bridled and bitted, at the same time the great territorial families of England were enthroned. And from that period, those territorial families reigned with an almost undisputed sway over the destinies and the industry of the people of these kingdoms. Now the myth, the story goes that this was done and there were rights given. This was the beginning of constitutional monarchy. But I'm afraid that's just not the case. The constitutional monarchy was begun for the sake of guarding the privileges of those elite families. The common man, even many of the upper middle class, gained nothing from this. Yes, those loyal to the Protestant church had things to gain, but economically, this was to the benefit of those elite groups and landholding gentry. It was a coup d'etat for them and no one else. And this settlement, this constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy which grew out of it, served them, not the needs of the people. And this is the current settlement today, and many of those still in control of the Conservative Party today are the direct lineage benefactors of those who engaged in that coup d'etat and put into motion this order of doing things. And that is the foundation of the civic structure of the United Kingdom today. Now, it did grant more rights and did expose certain corruptions. Fair enough. But Catholic rights were trampled upon through and through, and bloodshed opened up in Ireland and in Scotland. Speaking about Scotland, the second date is 1707. Now, prior to this, Scotland was not in a good place. They had gone to Panama, of all places, to try and build a colony. In the 1690s, Scotland was not in a strong financial position. These wars to the south between England and the Netherlands had affected its trade. And the climate was going through a cooling phase, which was very bad for its agricultural economy. And so its merchants came up with an idea, a company, to found a colony, New Caledonia, in Panama on the isthmus, the narrow strip of land, hoping to create a cargo loading station, essentially, to carry goods over, to connect trade from Europe to Asia. Now, in the centuries that followed, this would be expanded upon with a canal, but the technology at the time did not support this, and a colony was founded nonetheless. But 80% of them died. Malady, famine, malnutrition. The creatures and the insects in that tropical clime did not suit them. And they tried again, same result. But the real blow was that this was an investment requiring 20% of all the capital in Scotland invested into it and then lost. The lowlands of Scotland plummeted into economic ruin as a direct result of this. And further to the south, England was like, well, if you give us the keys, we'll solve your problems. The money that England offered Scotland would be £100 million. They approached these investors, but there was a catch. Support our cause of the Union. The economic state of Scotland was woeful in this time, as a direct consequence of England's actions. Yes, fair enough, Scotland made a dire mistake in this Panama venture, but there was also a divide between these Presbyterians, which controlled most of Scotland, and those of a more Anglican faith. So you had these merchants who had gone to Panama or invested in that venture, and a few people who were not exactly Presbyterian, and amongst these groups who were supporting the Union and those who were not, you had the Jacobites, who after the coming over of William of Orange, did not support this new monarchy, and they wanted to restore the line of James II. Even though these were two very closely related, there were differences and, of course, religion. The Highlands had a lot of Catholic influence in Scotland, and there was this rubbing up against between these various positions, and those who supported the current monarchy of William of Orange and Mary, they saw this union could solve their problems with internal political struggles within Scotland by reducing their enemies to meaningless periphery. Because if they joined with England, they were automatically in power for the rest of their lives. We can see now, there's clear evidence they were bribed. English commissions approached those investors and said, "We will pay for your losses in this Panama venture. Support the union of our two realms." And there was the drumbeat in the decades going up to 1707. There was a reaction against this in Scotland. Parliamentarians gave bold, brilliant speeches against this union and for. I'm not citing either for or against in this channel. That's up to you. I'm just explaining how this current state of the United Kingdom came to exist. There was essentially a movement within England to buy Scottish politicians and investors and succor elements of the church into their wing by promising freedoms without this threat of a Catholic dynasty. And so with all these groups amassed together and the weight of the economic strength of a growing, newly blooming England, who had brought in Dutch ideas of economic progress, who founded, the Bank of England, new types of investment, founding new companies to trade and bring in economic growth. Some aspirational merchants in Scotland saw this and appealed to English authorities and said, "Well, if I back this union, will you support my trade?" And they said yes. And so there was a lot to gain financially for some in joining this proposed union of England and Scotland. But the identity of the Scots, they had fought wars of independence against England. This was not something the majority of their country wanted. Estimates are clearly 75% were against this union. But in the vote, the members of Parliament were essentially bought with English gold. Things were not even easy after this union was accepted, but the economy of Scotland began to regain its health because England, in exchange for this obvious and clear gaining of power, paid off the debts. They didn't get rid of Scottish laws. They kept their legal structure, essentially, and their Presbyterian rights in the church. But there was no Scottish Parliament. They said, "Well, we're getting rid of our English Parliament, but where shall we put the new Parliament? I know, let's put it where the English Parliament is." So essentially, the English Parliament abolished the Scottish Parliament, and in exchange, Scotland got a mere fraction of the lords that they had, and a mere fraction of the MPs that they had. It was a bit of a rough deal, but in exchange there is the truth. The prestige of empire quickly gained pace after this, and Glasgow boomed, because England, of course, needed a port as far to the northwest on the mainland above Ireland to go out above to Canada as possible. And Glasgow boomed. One of the most beautiful architectural cities of that Neo-Georgian classical era, if you ever have a chance to see it. This is how the United Kingdom came to be, a military coup d'etat organized by a ruling feudal Norman elite, and then an organized campaign of bribery and infiltration into another country's independent parliament, one by one, buying its upper class and investment groups to switch them over in their loyalties and vote their own country out of existence. That is how the United Kingdom was born, And this, we in Wales, we were not even really acknowledged that we existed, and now we were in a bigger state without any word of us existing on a map. We were in a dire state. But being British, we were coming into being of a new global superpower and a new epic with a new swagger to our walk in how powerful we found ourselves, despite not even having a Welsh parliament or any legal structure of our own. So that's how we in Wales went from being within this English kingdom to being within this United Kingdom. And next time we come to that kingdom expanding commercially, and the families changing and shifting in their commercial attitudes has an effect upon our culture and our country here in Wales. May I take this moment to thank my patrons on the screen now. Thank you for your donation, and any of you who contribute, be it like, leave a super like. Thanks for watching. Diolch yn fawr.